In part 2 of my conversation with Abbie, she talks about how she won her principal position back, and then how she found that she was being paid considerably less than her male colleagues, and how she fought to be paid a salary commensurate with them. And finally, we discuss how she was able to stay so strong in such a difficult situation. You had to have several trials. I remember on one trial, let me quote this. This is before the second trial. This is amazing. The quote, which I assume was the first in German, it says, "The plaintiff does not possess the necessary physical strength to be a leader of the trombone section. She is not in the position to lead the trombone group. Apart from that, she lacks the required empathy," unbelievable, "to translate the wishes of the music director."
I mean, wow, right?
Yeah, exactly. And how did people in the orchestra, did they know that you were going through this or not?
Yeah, they were hardly aware of it, actually. I think they kind of knew, Frau Conant's making a process or something, but I never talked about it. I was just very professional. I would show up, play my best, leave and not talk about it. I was, not that kind of a person, it's like, I just kept it to myself and, if somebody asked, I might say something, but nobody really asked, So, So anyway, so that took 5 years, and I had to, let's see. Oh, wait, yeah. And when I getting my position back, I had to re-audition. And there's a whole saga about that, because what they decided was they gave the city of Munich years to come up with criticisms against me. They couldn't remember what I'd even played, right? So they had to go looking through, old programs to say, well, okay, she played Tuba Mirum, right? Okay, she played Mahler Fifth. Okay, so they criticized those two things. Well, all of this is recorded by the Bavarian radio. They could have just played the recordings.
Right,
but no, they didn't do that. So they thought they were okay. Well, we'll get her on this. She could, they claimed that I was having trouble breathing, right? Unüberhörbar and all this stuff like, or something like, I had no idea, right? And I was like, what? Well, as it turned out, I had gotten a glowing letter of testimonial from the guest conductor that had, conducted the Mozart Requiem and Mahler Fifth.
Who was that?
It was Yoav Talmi.
Okay.
I don't know if you knew him.
No, I haven't heard of that name. Yeah.
Anyway, so that just kind of blew them out of the water. And then they were given another chance, the city. I won, okay, obviously. And then they did an appeal. Yeah. Zweite Instanz. And then the judge then decided, okay, well then we need a conductor to decide, because I'm not a musician, right? So each side was supposed to make suggestions, which I thought was really weird. But anyway, so I found, a book of all the conductors in Germany, all the opera houses and symphony orchestras. And I just handed that in. I said, I'll play for any of them, And they came up with they couldn't find a conductor who would say yes, because probably in the end, anybody the judge picked or anybody they picked would be, worried about never being able to conduct again at the Munich Philharmonic if they vote, if they found me adequate. See?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So conductors, none of them wanted to do that. So they decided, then we'll get a trombone professor. And so they suggested a trombone professor in Munich from another orchestra. As it turned out, we were vying for the same professorship, right? So there was a conflict of interest. So this took years. Then finally, they got another guy who was a professor in Mannheim at the time, and Paul Schreckenberger. right, Terror Mountain. And he sent, the excerpts that he thought, most difficult ones that would really prove one way or the other, whether I was fit to play second trombone physically or mentally or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so he set a date.
Second trombone or first trombone?
First trombone.
First trombone, okay.
Mm-hmm. And, because I had second.
Yeah.
But
right.
I had to prove that I could play first again. Yeah. So he sent those. And then what he would do was he would set a date and then cancel right before it. After, me practicing, when you're in the orchestra, you don't usually practice excerpts all the time. So, you really have to go for it, right?
Right.
And then what he'd do is he would like put the appointment where I was, had to play another audition basically for him. He would put it like right after a vacation, knowing that I would have to then use my whole vacation time, to practice hard. And he did that for 2 years.
Why?
He was basically just being a jerk, right? And a kind of form of harassment. And then at the end, he said, they were going to pay him like $1,000 or something, the equivalent of or more for 45 minutes to listen to me. And he finally said, I don't have time to do it. Okay, so there's 2 years of my life. And then they looked for another one, and another trombone professor said yes immediately, and basically sent me the same excerpts or similar, and said, okay. And like 3 weeks later, he made a time, and I traveled up to Detmold and did this audition on the big stage they have up there, and it was professionally recorded. And then an official person from the city of Munich was there to make sure everything went okay. And that was Rolf Quinque. You might know him.
Yeah, I've never met him. The trumpet player.
The trumpet professor at what was then the Richard Strauss Conservatory.
Right. Very famous. Yeah. I had a couple of records of his, and very famous, especially for high trumpet playing, Baroque trumpet playing.
Yeah, and he had his own methodology and everything, right? Yeah. And and he just basically made sure that everything was above board. And so Heinz Fadle was the professor at Detmold, and he was the guy that re-auditioned me. And so he had me play each excerpt at least 3 times, sometimes 4 times in a row, and with different tempi, with different phrasings, different Anweisungen, different wishes.
Yeah.
So he could really tell if I were flexible, if I had empathy, because that was the one thing that, of course, apparently I lacked, and all that stuff. And so, it was grueling. It was not like any normal audition at all. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of that, he had to write up a report of what he heard. He listened to the tape a whole bunch of times and really analyzed it. And he had to write to the judge so that he would understand it. And he basically said stuff about my playing, my embouchure, my breathing. And then he said, the only thing I could find where there was one single, not quite centered note in the audition. I did play well, and that's so that was basically it. That's when I got my position back. Right?
But didn't you? One of the things that to me I would think would be the most humiliating was that you had to take a breathing test.
That was pretty early on. Yeah. Okay. See what I mean? It's a long story. And
yeah, it is. And I'm not just trying to.
No, I'm glad you reminded me.
But I think it's really important that if people don't know this story, just to realize how humiliating certain parts of it were. Because I want to ask you afterwards. I want to get to this how you can be so strong to go through this. But anyway, first talk about this breathing test.
Oh gosh. So I had told my first union lawyer, Herr Hohmann, very, very nice, very dignified man. And, I said, there's this famous brass teacher, just world famous. Everybody goes to him. His name is Arnold Jacobs, and he's in the Chicago Symphony, and he's the world's expert on breathing and brass playing. Maybe I should go to him and get some sort of official documentation that, my breathing's fine and I'm strong enough to play first trombone. He said, well, that's an idea. Or maybe you should go to a lung clinic because, everybody understands that. And I said, okay, where would I find a lung clinic? Well, as it happened, just in one of the suburbs of Munich is a very famous one called the Gautinger Lungenklinik, lung clinic. And he said, just go there and have them just really check you over thoroughly and write it up, and we can use that. Okay. So I went, and they kind of poked, I had to disrobe, and they poked around, and and they put me in this airtight cabin where I had to sort of breathe through tubes and breathe as fast as I could and breathe out as fast as I could. They measured how much, they pricked my ear and took blood to see how fast my blood oxygenated. They, all of these tests for people that have emphysema usually, or, some pneumonia, or these kinds of things. And so then they called, after all of these tests, they called me in and they said, they were kind of looking at me like, well, why are you here? Are you some sort of athlete?
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm a trombone player, and they said, well, these results are great. You're incredibly, you have a lot of air and you can move it really quickly and all this other stuff. And so I had all those results, and that, I don't know if they actually, I think it made maybe some difference in the court case, but I had to do that, and just doing that was kind of creepy, because it's like, wait a minute, it's just, I don't know. I don't even know how to put it into words.
Yeah.
Actually.
And to me, it's actually almost irrelevant because I know, for example, I'm sure Gail Williams. Great horn player. Gail has a really limited vital capacity. Everybody talks about vital capacity and how important it is. And Gail does not have a big vital capacity at all, but she's so incredibly efficient. If you watch her when she plays, it's like a textbook case of posture and how you should play an instrument, in terms of breathing, because she can't get away with being sloppy with her breathing with somebody else who has a big vital capacity can. So it's partially, or to a large extent, how you use what you have, and so to me, sending you to have your lungs tested and all of that, even though you came out looking, perfect, to me, that's totally irrelevant if you're doing the job, but sounds like that's not what they were after anyway. So, but for me, one of the questions, if we get into thinking about how this relates to today and just general things,
sure.
One thing that I think about a lot is how were you so strong in a situation like that? Because I would think for myself, it's like, okay, I'm going to bail. That's, I don't want to put up with this. Were you always that way, or did you find that you got stronger as time went on, or did you have to work on this? Did you read books, or did you just hang in there, or what? In other words, how for a young woman today who's in college or starting out with a job and who maybe is facing some problems, hopefully not nearly as extreme as yours, but what can they gain from your experience?
Well, no, I think basically, your basic musical, introvert. I just, as a personality, and basically a kind of a shy person, maybe I'm not anymore as much, but that's kind of my baseline, that's where I'm coming from. And, and I think a very friendly person always. And, I don't know, gosh, how shall I say? Like I said, I didn't have I wouldn't say I had any feminist consciousness or any sort of attitude or anything like that. I just wanted to play in an orchestra. And I just was like, what is all this other stuff? What's the I just didn't get it. And I think as things developed and I started to see, it was that first, the problem, we need a, man for the solo trombone that were just like, whoa, woke me up. And, that somebody would just say it. It seemed incredible to me, like, oh, so you spelled it out. Okay. I guess I had to, then it became more open with Celibidache. I mean, where he had demoted me, but he was still trying to, that's when he really tried to hurt me, tried to say, or just sort of disparage me, in his way, right? Like he had these, at the ends of concerts, he would have almost every solo chair stand up, or actually he would point and have, the person stand up. And so occasionally he would go first and third, right? So that I didn't, get a bow, right? Because when I was playing second, right? Things like that. And, I think to me, it was just so absurd and petty that I guess I didn't even take it personally, but it devastated some people, just devastated them, because he would do that to solo players. Yeah. And he knew how to destroy people. He did know that. And many people just, they fell by the wayside. He had, when he became general music director, he had what they called the Schwarze Liste. He had a black list of people he wanted to work on and, either move down or try to get rid of them. Yeah. But because of my fight, I think I actually blocked some people from getting, the full force of his attempt to destroy them. Some people, because obviously I was a big distraction because I was fighting back. I wasn't, taking it. Right, in a sense. Right. But, that sounds like I was strong and, like, I wasn't. It was terrifying. But I guess my husband always says that one of my strengths is that I have this ability to be imperturbable, I guess. I wasn't imperturbable. I just hit it. I hit it, like what I thought a professional should do. You do your job, you do really well, you're friendly, you're a good colleague, you go home. And then you have a nervous breakdown. Yeah. You have a crying jag or something, and then your dear husband puts you back together again, and that kind of thing. And and that's kind of how I worked. So I instinctively knew that if I were overreactive, then they'd say, "Oh, you're hysterical." You know what I mean? Hysterical woman.
They would say that about women, but not about men.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, she's just hysterical, and so I was always kind of kept my cool, partly because I was terrified to say the wrong thing, Yeah, and it was, and I never quite knew what was going on behind the scenes. Like, how could I know, right? There was this whole cabal, and there were these people around, orchestra members around Celibidache that were sort of his people, you know what I mean? And so the whole orchestra felt really uncomfortable and
sycophants, really, essentially.
Sycophants and people who would, if they had a chance, would betray you in a heartbeat, kind of thing, just people. I don't know. And so I guess one thing that really helped me when things got really heavy, there was I played in a brass quintet with most of the members, there's only one person who wasn't a member of the orchestra, and it was one of the trumpet players, and he had all the music, and it was his idea to form the quintet. Nice, really nice guy. And he was actually an American. And he one day he said, I read this book and it's really great, and I think you should read it. And so I took it home and I started to read it, and I was up all night reading it because it was called Pulling Your Own Strings by Dr. Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dyer is a very well-known psychologist.
Euroniasones.
Yeah, that was his first book. And I think Pulling Your Own Strings was his second book. Second or something like that. And nobody had ever heard of it or anything. And anyway, so I read it, and the very next day I put the stuff I'd learned into action, and it worked. When somebody's screaming at your face, an orchestra representative, and one of the things he said, if somebody's, literally yelling at you or screaming in your face, just turn your back. And I tried that, and it was like, oh my God, the screaming stopped and he went away. Wow. It was kind of like, I never learned how to deal with difficult, irrational, angry, hate-filled people before, right? I'd never had the experience, so how could I, right? And so that book just taught me all these actual tools. So when Celi Badaki, we had a total standoff that day, and he had, this was right after the famous talk in the taxi cab, right? And he said, "Oh, you should specialize in Ravel and Debussy." Well, then the next day we had Ravel and Debussy, right? So I thought, okay. So I sat first, even though I was supposed to understand, right, that I was going to sit second. The other first trombone was there, right? But I got there first. So I sat in the first chair, and I just thought, we'll just see what happens, right? And so that's when the orchestra representative came running up to me and started screaming at me and waving his arms. And then I saw him run to the little office where Celi Badaki hung out before rehearsals and tell him that Frau Conant was, sitting in the first chair and probably, And so Celi Badaki comes out from his little place and he's sort of, looking very grand and powerful, and he steps up on the conducting stand, turns to the first violins and says, "Excuse me, I have something that I have to do first." And then he turned and looked squarely at me, and he screamed at the top of his lungs. He said, "You agreed to play second, or to go down." So, and the whole orchestra, you could hear a pin drop. They were scared to death, right? 'Cause this was just bizarre. And, I just read that book. And so, and I knew, I guess I had this thing where if somebody's going to be all really emotional toward me and kind of manipulative, that I could just kind of remain neutral. And probably for the first time in my life, I was able to respond instead of just react, truly, And I said, I said, I never agreed. Then lassen Sie die Stelle, he said. Then leave the position. And I sat there for a moment and thought, well, okay, probably if I insist, they'll carry me out, And so I just changed places with the other solo trombone who was sitting second, and we carried on. Well, but during the first break, he called me in, right? And he was sitting at the end of this table, and I was supposed to, sit there, and he started screaming at me again, just yelling, "What do you think you're doing?" And you agreed, and I just sort of let it sort of, let him go, and I and I said, a la Wayne Dyer, I said, "You seem upset." I mean, I didn't mean it like I'm saying it now. I was literally just like, okay, what do I do now? I didn't have the book with me, but I just remembered, when somebody screamed, just say, "You seem upset," so that you get the sense that it's all coming from them.
Yeah, right.
And then not you. It has nothing to do with you, right? Yeah. And then he really went wild, and the whole orchestra was kind of sitting around, having their Weisswurst and their Weissbier and all that stuff. And they were just like, their ears were just like, what is going on at that table kind of thing. So what I would say to young women is like, that is a great book to have, I think, going into any situation, because, if most people don't learn just basic, how to deal with difficult people skills, or how to sort of separate yourself from others in that sense where you are basically you can respond instead of react. That's where it's at, where you can be objective. You can actually think of an answer or a response instead of just like freezing deer in the headlights.
Right, right.
And like the first bassoon said to me after that little incident, he said, I was absolutely, my whole body was shaking. I could hardly play after that. I mean, that's how bad it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
seems to me that things are far better today. I mean, there are more women in orchestras, and also there are women conductors now. There are a lot of women conductors over the past, especially over the past maybe 3 to 4 years.
Yes,
who have really gotten either prominent positions or prominent guest conducting opportunities. Yeah. So I think we've come a long way.
Yes.
But there's always, the future that things can get better.
Yes.
But you think for young women, not only brass players, but just for other instruments too, that you would think things are more promising now than they used to be.
Yes, I would still think. Yeah, like you say, there's still problems, and still as a low brass player, especially, I think maybe a trumpet player, but you're still going to walk into a group of men, all men, right? And some of them are not going to be well socialized. Yeah. and then just sort of try to, make you not feel welcome or not feel part of, the group, or comment on what you're wearing, or, just dumb, uncivilized behavior, if you will. Yeah. It's like, haven't been around, haven't had to work with women, let alone, if it's a principal position and they're, under, they're supposed to listen to the principal trombone, right?
Right,
the principal trumpet. Yeah. Some men would have a problem with that.
I have this theory, and tell me if you sort of agree with this or not, but I wrote a blog about it, and it started out with talking about tennis players, that when Bjorn Borg was very young and started his career, he hit a two-handed backhand. And in those days, nobody hit two-handed backhands. And so people said he basically doesn't have a chance, because he's not playing the right way. But then he started winning everything, and Jimmy Connors was playing at the same time with a two-handed backhand. And then all of a sudden players started doing that, and it became accepted. And a number of players still hit with a two-handed backhand today. And my theory was that if you take, in the world of trumpets, you take an Alison Balson and a Tina Ting Helseth, and they're top soloists now, and they're young girls who are looking at these two stars, and they're going to want to be trumpet players too, just like a young kid wanted to be like Bjorn Borg and hit a two-fisted backhand. And I think I see that being really positive in the fact that they're soloists, but so far there are not too many women who are principals in orchestras. And I think when you get more who become prominent in orchestras as principals, that maybe, let's say 10 years later, when you have these young girls who see them and look up to them as role models, 10 years later, there are going to be a lot of women that are principals in orchestras.
Oh, yeah. Well, one hopes. I mean,
Yeah.
I think Rebecca Bauer-Cherian is, solo first trombone in the Pittsburgh Symphony. She's been there for over 30 years. Right? Mm-hmm. And it's like nobody even remembers that she's been there all this time, and never asked, how was this, But I mean, it was, she almost got fired because some colleague went up to the general music director and said, she's not strong enough to play first, physically. Just a nasty comment. And wow. That's insane. She's great. And so she, but it put her under this just horrible stress for quite a while. You know what I mean? And they were putting, just to harass her, some of her colleagues were putting pornography inside of her music. So she'd open it up in the concert and turn to something horrific, just that kind of,
Yeah, that's stuff I can't understand.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, so it's not just me, and it is changing, and I just hope that, the brass section is not the last bastion, to change. I think humanity, hopefully we have a tendency to make progress, and we have, and evolve and change, learn new things, see differently, and drop a lot of our prejudices,
To hear more of my conversation with Abbie, please go to the bonus room, where we discuss her being featured in Malcolm Gladwell's best-selling book, Blink, her primary teachers and her own teaching, and also her thoughts on women in music today.